Your phone sits silent, no checking, no wondering what they're doing, no crafting responses you'll never send. The silence isn't strategy. It's not you playing hard to get or trying to make them miss you or performing indifference while secretly hoping they'll reach out. The silence is real. You're just done, gone quiet in ways that have nothing to do with them and everything to do with you, finally choosing yourself. And here's what you need to understand about what this silence is doing to them right now. It's destroying their entire defensive framework in ways their nervous system cannot process or defend against, because the silence wasn't part of their plan. When they rejected you, when they pushed you away, when they chose their defended comfort over showing up for you, they expected specific responses, expected you to fight for the relationship, expected pursuit, expected emotional reactivity that would confirm you still wanted them despite the rejection, still needed them despite their patterns, still cared enough to express pain in ways they could witness and feel significant about while maintaining their defended position. They had script in their head for how this would go. You'd be hurt, they'd feel guilty, but validated. You'd eventually reach out, they'd have power to decide whether to respond, and their significance in your life would remain confirmed even though the relationship had ended. The silence destroys this entire script, because silence doesn't confirm their significance. Silence doesn't validate their power. Silence doesn't give them anything to respond to, or manage, or feel important about. Silence is void where their expected drama should have been, and in that void they're confronting something their ego cannot tolerate. That you've moved on so completely, they don't exist in your world anymore. That they don't matter enough to warrant even anger or pain. That you've withdrawn all investment so thoroughly that they've become irrelevant. And irrelevance, complete absence of significance in your life, is the one thing the avoidance defensive system has no tools to manage. The three responses they expected from you that would have kept them in control. The avoidance defensive system depends on specific reactions from you that confirm their significance while maintaining their power. Understanding what they expected helps you see why your silence is so devastating to their framework. They expected pursuit, you fighting for the relationship, trying to convince them to reconsider, demonstrating through your effort that you couldn't accept the rejection. When avoidant pushes you away, their unconscious expectation is that you'll push back, you'll pursue, you'll try to change their mind, you'll fight for the relationship in ways that demonstrate you can't let go, can't accept the ending, need them too much to walk away without resistance. This pursuit would have served multiple functions for them, would have validated their significance, you're fighting for them, which means they matter enormously to you, would have confirmed their power, they're the one being pursued, which means they control whether you get what you're pursuing, would have allowed them to feel wanted while maintaining defended distance. They can reject your pursuit while feeling good about being wanted enough that you're making the pursuit. Your pursuit would have been their validation that didn't require their vulnerability, but you didn't pursue. You accepted the rejection completely, walked away without fight. The absence of pursuit doesn't just eliminate their validation. It suggests they're not worth pursuing, that losing them isn't devastating enough to fight against, that you can accept their absence without the resistance that would prove you can't bear it. The silence where pursuit should have been is evidence you're fine without them, and if you're fine without them, they're not as significant as they needed to believe they were. They expected pain or anger expressed through contact, messages about how they hurt you, explanations of your suffering that would validate their impact while requiring nothing from them. If not pursuit, they at least expected emotional expression, angry messages about what they did wrong, painful messages about how much they hurt you, some form of contact that communicated you were suffering from losing them This emotional expression, even if negative, would have served them. Your pain proves you're still emotionally engaged with them. Your anger proves they affected you enough to generate strong feeling. Either emotion confirms significance, confirms impact, confirms they matter enough to hurt you, which validates their ego without requiring them to actually do anything to repair the hurt. They could receive your pain, feel significant about creating it, feel guilty enough to feel human, but not feel required to change because the relationship is over anyway. Your pain would have been gift to their ego wrapped in your suffering, but you didn't give them this gift. You didn't express pain, didn't send angry messages, didn't communicate suffering in any form they could witness. The silence where emotional expression should have been means they have no evidence they affected you at all, no confirmation they hurt you, no validation that losing them created impact in your life. The silence suggests they're so insignificant that their rejection didn't even warrant emotional response. And this suggestion is unbearable to ego that needed your pain to confirm it mattered. They expected ongoing contact in some form, attempts to stay friends, checking in periodically, maintaining connection that would keep you in their orbit, even if relationship was over. Even if you didn't pursue and didn't express pain, they expected minimal, ongoing contact. You'd reach out eventually, suggest staying friends, check in to see how they're doing, send occasional message about something that reminded you of them. This ongoing contact, however minimal, would have confirmed you're still oriented toward them in some way, still thinking about them enough to maintain thread of connection, still available in their orbit, even if not in their life. This availability would have served their ego by confirming they can still access you if they want to, that you haven't completely removed yourself, that door remains cracked open, even if not fully open, but you didn't maintain contact. You didn't suggest friendship, you didn't check in, you didn't send messages, you removed yourself completely from their orbit, withdrew all access, closed every door so thoroughly they cannot reach you even if they wanted to. The silence is complete absence of you from any channel they could access. And this complete absence means they have no way to confirm you're still thinking about them, no way to maintain illusion of access, no way to keep you available in background of their life as option they could activate if they chose. The silence eliminates their power to access you. And powerlessness is what avoidance defended position was designed to prevent. How your silence is systematically destroying the defensive narratives that protected them. Your silence isn't just absence of contact, it's active force dismantling every defensive story the avoidant built to protect themselves from confronting their own responsibility and their own loss. The silence eliminates their ability to blame you for the ending. Without your emotional response to point to as evidence you were too much, they're left with their patterns as obvious cause. During relationship and after it ended, avoidant builds narrative where you were the problem. Too needy, too demanding, too emotional, too sensitive. This narrative protects them from having to acknowledge their own patterns as cause of ending, but this narrative requires evidence of you being too much. Too needy looks like desperate pursuit after rejection. Too demanding looks like angry messages requiring they explain themselves. Too emotional looks like pain expressed in ways they can point to as excessive. Your silence eliminates all this evidence. You're not being needy. You're being completely independent, moving forward without them. You're not being demanding. You're demanding nothing, not even explanation. You're not being too emotional. You're being so controlled they have zero access to your emotional state. Without evidence to support the defensive narrative, they're left confronting reality, their patterns, their emotional unavailability, their withdrawal, Their inability to sustain intimacy ended the relationship. Your silence is mirror reflecting only their own behavior back at them, with nothing of yours they can use as distraction or justification. And this mirror is forcing recognition they've been defending against. They were the problem, not you. Without your presence taken for granted, they're experiencing actual absence of everything you provided, making what was invisible during a relationship become hypervisible through its loss. While you were present, they took you for granted. Your support was invisible because it was constant. Your understanding was invisible because it was reliable. Your consistency was invisible because you were always there. They couldn't see what you provided because having it made it background that didn't require their attention. But your silence removed everything. Now, they're experiencing life without your support, without your understanding, without your consistency. The absence makes what was invisible become visible through the void it creates. They're cataloging what's missing. No one checks on them the way you did. No one understands them without explanation the way you did. No one provides the specific support you provided. No one creates the safety you created. Your silence isn't just absence of contact. It's absence of everything you were doing for them that they failed to recognize while receiving it. And experiencing the absence is teaching them what they had through making them feel what they don't have anymore. This education through absence is more powerful than any words about their taking you for granted would have been, because it's visceral, daily, inescapable recognition of specific void your presence was filling that nothing else fills. The silence proves you can thrive without them, destroying their unconscious assumption that you needed them more than they needed you, inverting the power dynamic they depended on. The avoidant maintained assumption throughout relationship. You needed them more than they needed you. You were more invested, more attached, more dependent. This assumption was crucial to their power position. They mattered more to you than you mattered to them, which meant they were safer because they had less to lose, more powerful because they could leave more easily than you could. But your silence destroys this assumption through demonstrating you're fine without them, better than fine, thriving without them. The silence proves you didn't need them the way they assumed, proves you can build life, move forward, be happy without their presence. If you can thrive without them, maybe you never needed them in the ways their ego wanted to believe. Maybe they mattered less to you than they thought. Maybe the power position they assumed was illusion. This recognition inverts the relationship hierarchy their defensive system depended on. They rejected you believing you'd suffer more. Your thriving proves they might be the one suffering more. Your silence demonstrates they might have needed you more than you needed them. This inversion destroys power dynamic that made them feel safe, leaving them in position they never expected to occupy. The one who lost more, the one who's suffering more, the one who needs what they can have, while you clearly don't need what you no longer have. The specific moment where this turns on you and what it reveals. But here's the uncomfortable question. Your silence forces you to answer. If you're genuinely done, if you've genuinely moved on, if the silence is genuinely about you choosing yourself, why are you reading this? Why do you need to know what your silence is doing to them? Because truly done means you don't care what it's doing to them. Truly moved on means their internal experience is irrelevant to you. Truly choosing yourself means you're not spending energy wondering whether they're suffering appropriate consequences or recognizing what they lost. The fact that you're here, reading about how your silence is destroying them, wanting to understand what it's doing to their defensive framework, reveals something you might not want to acknowledge. Part of your silence is still about them. Part of you is still oriented toward whether they're affected by your absence. Part of you needs them to be suffering from your silence for the silence to feel like enough. And this need, this investment in their suffering, this tracking of their consequences, is keeping you partially attached to someone you're claiming to be done with. True silence wouldn't require knowing what the silence is doing. True moving on wouldn't need confirmation that your absence is destroying them. True choosing yourself wouldn't organize any mental or emotional energy around their experience of losing you. If you were actually as done as your silence suggests, you wouldn't be here learning about what your silence means to them. You'd be too busy building your life to care. The silence is real, and your tracking of what the silence is doing is revealing you're not as far past them as the silence makes it appear. Stop tracking their suffering. Stop needing to know if your silence is destroying them. Stop organizing any part of your internal world around whether they're experiencing appropriate consequences. Let the silence be about you, not about what it's doing to them. That's when you'll actually be free. Why the silence is more devastating to them than any expression of pain would have been. The avoidance defensive system is calibrated to manage specific responses: pursuit, pain, anger. But silence represents something they cannot process or defend against effectively, because silence isn't response they have strategies for. Your pain would have validated they mattered, but silence suggests they're so irrelevant their rejection didn't warrant emotional response. If you'd expressed pain through messages, through mutual friends, through any communication revealing you were hurt, they'd have felt significant. Your pain would have proved they mattered to you. That relationship was important, that losing them created impact. Even negative impact confirms significance. Even pain proves they affected you. The defensive system can process this, can use your pain as validation while maintaining defended position. They matter enough to hurt you, which confirms ego's need to feel important, without requiring them to be vulnerable or change. Your pain would have served them, but silence serves nothing in them. Silence doesn't validate significance. Silence doesn't prove impact. Silence suggests their rejection was so inconsequential you didn't bother expressing pain about it, that they matter so little you couldn't be bothered to respond. That relationship meant so little, its ending required no emotional processing with them. Silence implies irrelevance, and irrelevance is what ego cannot tolerate. Your pain would have been manageable. Your silence is devastating precisely because it denies them the significance they needed your response to confirm. Your anger would have shown you still cared enough to be engaged, but silence communicates complete indifference that's more threatening to their ego than negative emotion. Similarly, if you'd expressed anger, told them off, explained their failures, expressed rage about their patterns, they'd have confirmation you're still emotionally engaged with them. Anger is form of caring. You don't get angry at people who don't matter. Anger means they affected you enough to generate strong feeling. Defensive system can handle this, can deflect anger, can tell themselves you're overreacting, can use anger as evidence you were too emotional anyway. Anger serves their defensive narrative while confirming their significance. But silence contains no anger. Silence is opposite of emotional engagement. Silence communicates you're so done, you don't even have anger left, that they're not worth the energy anger requires, that you've moved past them so completely generating emotional response feels unnecessary. Silence is indifference, and indifference means they don't matter. Ego needs to matter, even negatively. Your anger would have confirmed they matter. Your silence denies it, and denial of mattering is more threatening than any amount of anger, because anger at least proves you're still oriented toward them emotionally, while silence proves you're not oriented toward them at all. The silence creates void where they expected drama, and the void forces them to feel full weight of their patterns without buffering validation. They rejected you expecting drama, expecting response, expecting engagement of some kind, positive or negative, but engagement. They were prepared to handle whatever response came. But silence isn't response they can handle. It's absence of response, absence of engagement, absence of you. And in that absence, that void where your response should have been, they're confronting something their defensive system cannot buffer them from. Full weight of what they rejected. Without your pain to focus on, without your anger to deflect, without your pursuit to manage, there's nothing between them and reality of what they've lost. They sit with rejection they initiated in silence that followed, and in that silence is forced recognition. They rejected something valuable, and you accepted rejection so completely, you're not even bothering to make them feel the impact. The void the silence creates is filled only with their own recognition of what they destroyed, with no validation or distraction to make that recognition more bearable. And sitting with unmediated recognition of loss is destroying them in ways your dramatic response never could have, because dramatic response would have given them something to focus on other than their own choice and its permanent consequences. What your silence actually accomplishes and why maintaining it serves your freedom. Your silence isn't reactive absence, it's active choice, creating specific outcomes that serve your healing and potentially their growth, though their growth isn't your responsibility or concern. The silence forces them to sit with their patterns without your presence distracting them, creating conditions where genuine self-examination becomes possible, even if unlikely. While you were present, engaged, responding to their patterns, they didn't have to fully examine themselves. They could focus on managing you, on your reactions, on dynamic between you. Your presence was distraction from their internal work. Your silence removes distraction. Now, there's nothing to manage except themselves. Nothing to focus on except their own patterns and choices and responsibility for outcome. The silence creates conditions where self-examination becomes possible because all external distractions are gone. They're alone with themselves and with recognition of what their patterns cost. This doesn't guarantee they'll do examination. Most avoidants don't even when conditions are perfect. But silence creates possibility. With you present and engaged, there was no possibility. You were buffer between them and themselves. Your silence removes buffer and forces them to confront themselves without mediation. This is necessary condition for growth, even though it's not sufficient condition. They might use the condition to grow. They might defend against it harder. Either way, the silence creates the only environment where change could potentially occur. Your silence demonstrates you've genuinely chosen yourself, which is only stance that might eventually motivate genuine work rather than superficial attempts to restore dynamic. Throughout relationship, they could tell themselves you'd always be available, always accept them back, always tolerate their patterns. This assumption prevented genuine motivation to change, because why change when patterns don't produce permanent consequences? But your silence proves you've genuinely chosen yourself over relationship, proves you won't accept them back without transformation, proves their patterns produce permanent consequence. This reality that you're actually gone, actually done, actually choosing yourself is only thing that might motivate genuine change, not superficial change designed to get you back, not temporary adjustment reverting once you return, but genuine therapeutic work on attachment wounds because they finally recognize cost of not doing work is permanent loss of people who matter. Your silence is message. Choose yourself or lose me permanently. And this message, if anything can, might motivate deep work. If you weren't silent, if you remained engaged, message would be, you can have both, your patterns and me. That message motivates nothing. Your silence creates possibility of their transformation by making clear the cost of not transforming. Though again, their transformation is their work, not your concern. The silence protects you from being pulled back into dynamic before genuine capacity has been demonstrated, and protects you from accepting promises instead of requiring proof. If you weren't silent, if you maintained contact, if you responded to their outreach, you'd be vulnerable to being pulled back before genuine change occurred. Avoidant in pain from your silence will say whatever needed to restore contact, will promise change, will express insight about patterns, will seem different in moment of crisis, but crisis-driven change rarely sustains. Patterns return once crisis passes, once you're available again, once pain of your absence is relieved. Your silence protects you from this cycle, ensures that if they reach out, if you eventually respond, it's only after sustained demonstrated change over significant time. Silence gives you distance to assess whether any change they claim is real transformation or temporary adjustment, prevents you from accepting promises instead of requiring proof. This protection is essential for your well-being and for any possibility of functional relationship in future if you were ever to reconsider, which you shouldn't need to, because you should be building life that doesn't require their transformation to be fulfilling. The permanent impact. Your silence creates that changes how they'll approach all future relationships. Your silence doesn't just affect this relationship, it fundamentally alters their psychology in ways that will affect every relationship they have going forward, teaching lessons they couldn't learn any other way. They've learned that people have limits, and enforcing those limits means permanent loss, destroying assumption that their patterns are infinitely tolerable. Before your silence, they operated under unconscious assumption their patterns were sustainable, that they could withdraw and people would accept it, that they could be emotionally unavailable and people would tolerate it indefinitely, that they could push people away and those people would still be there when avoidant was ready to reconnect. This assumption allowed them to maintain patterns without fear of permanent loss. But your silence proved assumption false. You had limit. You reached it. You enforced it. And enforcing meant you left permanently. You didn't accept them back when they realized what they lost. You didn't tolerate patterns indefinitely. You became closed door rather than open door waiting for them. This taught them their patterns have permanent consequences, that people don't wait forever, that there's limit to how much emotional unavailability someone will accept before choosing themselves and leaving for good. This lesson changes how they approach all relationships now. They can't operate under unconscious assumption of infinite tolerance. They know patterns can cost them people permanently. This knowledge creates anxiety with new people. Anxiety, their patterns will cost them this person too. Anxiety that coexists with patterns continuing, because knowing you should change and being able to change are different things. Your silence taught them consequences are real. But teaching came too late to save relationship with you, and anxiety it creates with new people makes new relationships harder without making avoidant more capable. Your silence proved that their significance isn't guaranteed, that they can become irrelevant to someone who once loved them, which contradicts their ego's need for permanent importance. The avoidance ego needs to feel significant, needs confirmation they matter. Throughout their life, they've maintained this significance through various means, being the one who leaves rather than being left, being the one who cares less, being the one who maintains power through emotional distance. But your silence proves something their ego cannot reconcile. They can become irrelevant, can become so unimportant to someone who once loved them deeply that they don't even warrant response, don't even generate enough significance to produce pain or anger or pursuit. This proof that significance isn't permanent, isn't guaranteed, can be completely lost through their own patterns, contradicts everything their ego built itself around. They thought mattering was permanent, thought once they mattered to someone, they'd always matter in some form. Your silence taught them they can become nothing, can go from being center of someone's world to being completely absent from that world. This lesson is devastating to ego structure that depended on maintaining significance. And it changes all future relationships because now they know their significance is fragile, can be lost, isn't protected by defensive strategies that previously felt like they guaranteed they'd never be the one who lost more, or cared more, or needed more. The single image this lands on, they reach out finally, months later, year later, whenever their need to confirm they still matter becomes unbearable. And the message sits there, delivered. Read receipt shows you saw it. And then, nothing. No response. No anger about their audacity in reaching out. No pain about what they're asking for. No engagement with their attempt to restore even minimal connection. Just silence continuing exactly as it's been continuing. And in that moment, seeing their message was read and generated zero response. They finally understand what your silence actually means. You've moved so far past them that even their direct attempt to access you doesn't warrant acknowledgement, that they've become so irrelevant to your life that responding feels like more energy than they're worth spending, that the door isn't just closed but locked and reinforced, and you've moved to an entirely different house and the address they have doesn't even reach you anymore. The silence isn't strategy. It's not game. It's not you playing hard to get or trying to make them suffer. The silence is you living your life in ways that don't include them in any form, don't organize around their absence, don't require their recognition or their suffering or their understanding to feel complete. They're discovering through the silence what they never understood while having you, that empaths who choose themselves don't go back, that people who've genuinely moved on don't need to prove they've moved on through responding to test whether they've moved on, that your silence is permanent because they're permanent irrelevant to life you're building now. Let them reach into void. Let them discover their messages disappear into silence that never breaks. You're not on the other end waiting to respond. You're not on the other end at all. You're somewhere else entirely, building something extraordinary with people who recognized your worth while having access to it. That's where you are, and where they are, reaching into void that doesn't reach back, is where their patterns left them. Permanent silence from someone who was never part of their plan. Perfect consequence for someone who planned everything, except what it would cost to lose you. Their panic will intensify as the silence continues, realizing too late that silence they thought was temporary stance is actually your permanent position. They'll wait for you to break, wait for anger to arrive, wait for pain to surface, wait for pursuit to begin. They'll tell themselves you're just making them wait, that eventually you'll respond. That silence is phase that will pass once you've processed hurt and are ready to engage again. But days become weeks, become months, and silence continues. Complete, unbroken, permanent. And slowly, they'll begin to understand. This isn't phase. This isn't temporary withdrawal. This is your life now. Life that doesn't include them. Life where their existence is so irrelevant, you don't even think about them enough to be angry. Don't hurt about them enough to express pain. Don't care about them enough to maintain even minimal connection. The silence they expected to be temporary strategy reveals itself to be permanent reality, permanent. And this recognition that you're not coming back, not engaging, not breaking silence ever, creates panic. Their defensive system has no protocol for managing, because all their defenses were designed to manage people who still care, people who are still engaged, people who can still be managed through their emotional investment. Your silence proves you're none of these. You don't care enough to manage, don't engage enough to manipulate, don't invest enough to control. You've removed yourself so completely from their orbit that their defensive strategies have no target to work on. And this targetless state, where their patterns have nothing to push against, nothing to manage, no one to control through maintained distance, leaves them completely powerless in ways their defended position was designed to prevent. The most devastating part isn't that you're silent, it's that your silence is effortless, revealing you're not maintaining silence through effort, but through genuine disinterest. If your silence required effort, if they could tell you were working hard to maintain it, struggling not to respond, fighting the urge to reach out, that would give them hope, would suggest you still care enough that silence is difficult, that underneath the silence is the emotional engagement they could potentially activate if they just found the right words, or the right timing, or the right approach. But your silence isn't effortful. It's easy. It's natural. It's not you restraining yourself from responding. It's you genuinely having nothing to say, no interest in saying it, no engagement to draw from, even if you wanted to craft response. This effortless quality of your silence is what's most devastating, because it proves you're not still invested enough to struggle. You're actually done, actually moved on, actually building life where they're so irrelevant that ignoring them requires zero effort, because thinking about them enough to craft response, even angry response, even cold response, feels like more attention than they deserve. They're learning, through the ease of your silence, what they couldn't learn through your words. That indifference is more permanent than anger. That ease is more final than struggle. That your silence being effortless means they've truly lost you in ways that they're returning or apologizing or changing can never undo, because you're not there to witness the returning or receive the apology or benefit from the changing. You're gone, completely. And the complete absence is teaching them what presence never could, that you were always too valuable to waste on someone who needed to lose you to recognize what having you meant. Their plan was built on you still caring. Your silence proves you don't, and that's the destruction of every assumption they built the rejection on. Let them sit in it. You have better things to do than break silence for people who weren't worth keeping it for. Their plan was built on you still caring. Your silence proves you don't. And that's the destruction of every assumption they built the rejection on. Let them sit in it. You have better things to do than break silence for people who weren't worth keeping it for. What the silence teaches them about the difference between power and control. The avoidant confuse maintaining control through emotional distance with having actual power in the relationship. And your silence is revealing they never had the power they thought they had, only the control you were allowing them to maintain. They thought they had power because they could withdraw and you'd stay. But your silence proves they only had the control you permitted while you were choosing to stay. Throughout the relationship, they maintained control through specific mechanisms. They could withdraw and you'd be there when they returned. They could be emotionally unavailable and you'd accept it. They could create distance and you'd tolerate it. This control felt like power, felt like they were the one who mattered more, needed less, could dictate terms. But they confused control with power. Control is what you have over someone who's choosing to give you control. Power is what you have when someone can't choose to remove themselves from your influence. They had control. The control you were allowing them by choosing to stay, by choosing to accept their patterns, by choosing to accommodate their limitations. But the moment you chose differently, the control evaporated. Because it was never power, it was just control you were permitting. Your silence is the evidence. They can't control whether you respond, can't control whether you're thinking about them, can't control your emotional state or your choices or your life in any way. The control they thought was power is revealed to be permission you've revoked, and they're discovering that without your permission, they have nothing. No control, no power, no influence, just their own patterns and the consequences of those patterns landing on them without you there to absorb the impact. The silence forces them to recognize that all the power dynamics they felt safe maintaining were illusions you were participating in until you stopped participating. They felt powerful being the one who cared less, felt powerful being the one who could leave more easily, felt powerful maintaining emotional distance while you sought emotional closeness. These power dynamics were real to them, made them feel safe, made them feel like they couldn't be hurt because they had less to lose. But these dynamics only existed because you were participating in them. You were the one seeking closeness, which made their distance powerful. You were the one caring more visibly, which made their caring less feel like advantage. You were the one invested in the relationship continuing, which made their ability to leave feel like leverage. But the moment you stopped participating, stopped seeking their closeness, stopped caring about their distance, stopped being invested in relationship continuing, the entire dynamic collapsed. Because the power they felt from these dynamics wasn't inherent power. It was relational power that required your participation to exist. Your silence withdrew your participation. And without your participation, they're learning. They have no power at all. They're just alone, with patterns that cost them someone valuable, and no ability to undo the cost, because the cost only exists because you're no longer participating in dynamic, where their patterns had power they thought they controlled. Why the silence is permanent, consequence that serves justice better than any punishment. The avoidant experiencing consequences of their patterns through your permanent silence is justice in its purest form, not revenge, not cruelty, but natural result of behavior meeting someone who finally enforces boundaries that protect themselves. They chose their defended comfort over showing up for you repeatedly, and permanent loss of you is proportional consequence that teaches what words never taught. Every time they withdrew when you needed presence, every time they chose emotional distance over vulnerability, every time they prioritized their defensive comfort over your legitimate needs. These were choices, repeated choices over time that created pattern you tried to address through communication, through patience, through creating space for their growth. They chose defended comfort anyway, repeatedly, consistently, until you finally enforce consequence. If you continue choosing patterns over partnership, you lose the partnership permanently. This consequence is proportional. You gave them opportunities. You communicated clearly. You created conditions for change. They chose comfort over change. The permanent loss is natural result of that choice. Not punishment you're inflicting, not revenge for how they hurt you. Natural consequence of choosing their patterns over your needs until you protected yourself by removing access. The silence is enforcement of consequence their behavior earned, and the permanence of the consequence is what finally teaches them, not through your words about impact of their patterns, but through experiencing the impact directly as permanent loss they cannot undo. The silence proves boundaries have teeth, that consequences aren't threats to manipulate behavior, but realities that arrive when boundaries are crossed. Throughout relationship, you probably had boundaries. Communicated what you needed, what you wouldn't accept, what would happen if patterns continued. They might have heard these boundaries as threats, as attempts to manipulate their behavior, as pressure to change that they could resist without real consequence. But your silence proves boundaries weren't threats. They were realities. You said you wouldn't stay if patterns continued. Patterns continued. You left. Permanently. This isn't threat that didn't materialize. This is boundary that was crossed and consequence that arrived exactly as stated. The silence is proof that your boundaries had teeth, that crossing them produces real results, that your words about consequences weren't manipulation. They were information about what would happen, and what you said would happen has happened, and the happening is permanent, because boundaries that have been crossed this many times don't get restored. The silence teaches them that boundaries from healthy people aren't negotiable or manipulable. They're limits that, when reached, produce permanent consequences that can't be undone through apology or promises or change behavior after the fact. Your thriving in the silence proves leaving was right choice, validating that relationship was costing you more than it was giving you. If you were struggling without them, if you were diminished by their absence, if your life was harder without them than it was with them, they could maintain narrative that relationship was good for you, even if difficult, that you needed them even if their patterns were problematic, that leaving was mistake you'd eventually recognize. But you're thriving, visibly thriving in ways that prove relationship was costing you more than it was providing. You're lighter without the weight of their patterns, freer without the constraint of accommodating their limitations, more yourself without the diminishment of making yourself smaller to fit their defended comfort. The thriving is proof that leaving was right choice, that silence is serving you, that life without them is better than life with them was. This proof destroys any narrative they could build about you, regretting the ending, or eventually coming back, or recognizing you made mistake. Your thriving in the silence is evidence that the mistake was staying as long as you did, not leaving when you finally did. And this evidence validates your choice in ways that make the silence permanent, because going back to someone who cost you the thriving you're experiencing now would be self-betrayal you're no longer capable of. The final recognition about what silence actually means for both of you. Understanding everything the silence is doing to them leads to one final recognition that determines whether you maintain the silence from place of freedom or from place of residual attachment. Their suffering from your silence is real and deserved and completely separate from your thriving. Both can exist without your thriving, depending on their suffering. Their suffering. The silence is destroying them. They're experiencing consequences, learning lessons, confronting realities their defenses protected them from. All of this is happening. All of this is real. And all of this is completely separate from your thriving. Your thriving doesn't depend on their suffering. Your freedom doesn't require their consequences. Your growth doesn't need their destruction to validate it. Both are happening. They're suffering from losing you. You're thriving from leaving them. Both are real, but they're separate processes. You don't need their process to validate yours. Don't need their pain to prove your worth. Don't need their consequences to confirm leaving was right. Your thriving stands alone. Their suffering stands alone. The silence created both. But your thriving is what matters to your future, while their suffering is just background noise to the life you're building. Hold them as separate. Let their suffering exist without needing to witness it or track it or use it as measure of your significance. Your significance is proven by your thriving, not by their consequences. The most powerful thing about your silence isn't what it's doing to them. It's what it's allowing you to become without them draining your energy. The silence is doing things to them, destroying their defenses, teaching them lessons, creating consequences. All of this is interesting. None of it is the point. The point is what the silence is allowing you to become, without their patterns draining your energy, without their emotional unavailability requiring you to diminish your needs, without their defended comfort requiring you to make yourself smaller. The silence created space, and in that space you're building, becoming more yourself, accessing parts of your personality that were suppressed while accommodating them, developing capacities that were dormant while your energy was spent managing their patterns, discovering what you're capable of when you're not organizing your life around someone else's limitations. This becoming, this transformation happening in the space the silence created, is the power of the silence, not what it's doing to them, what it's allowing in you. Focus there. Let the silence serve your becoming. Let their consequences be background noise to your transformation. That's where the real power lives. That's what the silence is actually for. Your silence wasn't part of their plan. It was the destruction of their plan. The irrelevance where significance should have been. The void where drama should have filled. The permanent consequence where temporary discomfort should have resolved. They planned for your pursuit, for your pain, for your continued availability in some form. They planned for everything except the one thing that's actually happening. You being genuinely done, genuinely silent, genuinely building life where they don't exist in any form that matters. Let the plan stay destroyed. Let them scramble to make sense of silence they can't decode or manage or control. You're not silent to destroy them. You're silent because you have better things to do than engage with people who couldn't honor you while they had you. That's the silence. That's the power. That's what they're discovering was never part of their plan, but is the permanent reality of what their patterns cost them. Complete irrelevance to someone who used to organize their world around them. Perfect consequence. Permanent silence. And your freedom expanding in the space where they used to drain you. That's what the silence means. For both of you. Let it mean exactly that. And build something extraordinary in the quiet.